The show where anything goes. Motivation, mindset, recovery, philosophy, and life. We become who we are through what we experience. We all have a story, and this is My Backstory with Josh Boyer.
Here we are on the My Backstory podcast with Austin Legg for the third time. And I have to share something with the listeners. I did a podcast with Austin last week, and I walked away from that podcast emotional, uplifted, enlightened. I mean, like, it was like I walked away from it being like, dude, that was like, I think, the best podcast I've ever done. The best podcast across the board. It was like, I felt like I asked the right questions, and like Austin's share was like so fucking amazing and truthful and authentic and real. And I walked away from my computer like I always do, because it was like late at night. I'm like, all right, cool. I'm gonna go to bed. Push stop on my Zoom recorder, and I'm like, all right, cool. And I went to end the meeting, and usually it goes, hey, transferring to like your computer or whatever, but I didn't even look. And I got up in the morning and realized that it didn't record the episode. It recorded my voice on the Zoom, but not Austin's. And so I was fucking devastated and like, oh, dude, how am I going to tell Austin this? Because, I mean, honestly, man, like in my heart, I was like, dude, like you poured your heart out into that episode. And I felt like I didn't honor that by like being like on top of my game and like making sure that it was captured. And so it made me feel like just like, I don't know, unprofessional, like I don't know even what word to use, but I just felt like shit, dude. It was the word, like I was dreading calling you, dude, to be honest. And thankfully, you were super gracious and like willing to come back on and share your story. So I'm sure we can bring that same magic back to this one.
You know, the reality is I kind of feel bad for you because you've listened to me now. This will be the third time tell the same stories, and I'm sure you're equally sick of it. So. No, we'll just try it again, and hopefully it works, and hopefully there's something still left in the tank to share with people.
I think there will be, especially with the first question that I'm going to ask you of how you're doing. And I want you to share the real how you're doing.
You know, I'm doing really well, man. Just the reality is, you know, I'm an ongoing project. I'd never say that my box is checked and I've moved on. But at the same time, like after dealing with it for so long and so many years, I've learned some of the warning signs. I've learned some of the things that when I start to feel like I'm slipping, when I start to just feel a certain way, and I can recognize that in myself. I can feel it in my body and my mind. You know, it's that as I've grown into an adult, I've learned how to kind of manage myself and my emotions. And so the reality is I'm doing great, better than I've ever done in my life. I feel like just year over year, you know, I'm just climbing one ladder rung at a time. And hopefully, ultimately, that'll lead to becoming my best self someday. But I'm not there yet. I'm still working on it, but I'm doing really well, man.
No, but you have like such a powerful story, and I've had the privilege of hearing that story. And I think sometimes, and I think you're probably guilty of this, we don't realize our own power. We don't realize like how much power we have and how much influence we have in the world and the impacts that we can make in the world. And I talked to one of your good buddies, Brandon Lilly, the other day. And that's one of the things that we talked about was recognizing our power. And he second my opinion of like Austin Legg. Like he has so much to give, so much. And when you realize that, it's going to be a game changer. It's going to be like this. You're going to make such a huge impact. And so I want you to go into your story in terms of mental health. Like first, we're going to talk about suicide. And it's a super polarizing topic. It's something that a lot of people aren't willing to talk about. There's a lot of stigma surrounding it. So I want to ask you, I know the answer to it, but I want the listeners to hear if you've ever thought about suicide or attempted suicide.
Yeah, you know, it's hard for me to talk about because in a sense, I'm still kind of embarrassed. It's hard. It's a hard topic as a man to open up about, because ultimately, you feel like you're opening up to a weakness, and you're telling people how vulnerable you are. But the truth in all of that is, I spent probably 4 years where suicide was just a part of my everyday life. Definitely like 2 to 3 years where it was all I could think about, and it was like wake up in the morning and have to talk myself out of it, and then continue to have to talk myself out of it throughout the course of the day. It wasn't something that just kind of came and went. It was just a part of life. And that was a challenge for me. Obviously, it's hard to function. It's hard to function in a society where there's, peer pressure and school and demands and jobs and relationships and all these other things going on. It's hard to function in that society when you're trying not to kill yourself every day. And that put a lot of pressure on me. And it was just a hard time, man.
How old were you when all this was going?
Yeah, so that really kind of kicked off between like 16. Well, I'd say the peak of it was about 16 to 19. Yeah.
And like, do you think like part of like what you were going through, like emotionally, mentally, do you think it like played into, or do you think your home life played into any of that? Do you think your surroundings where you were growing up played into that? Was there people around you that were supporting you that you could talk to, anything like that?
Yeah. So, one of the challenges I faced when I was younger is like, I grew up in a good home. I had good parents. They took care of me. All my needs were met. I was the youngest, and my older siblings had all moved out, and so I was really the only kid left at home during this time period. But like I said, I had all my needs were met. I wasn't abused. I wasn't facing a lot of struggles that a lot of other people are facing. But the problem was that things just weren't right mentally. And to kind of compound on that, there was a time period when I was a sophomore in high school, so I was probably 16, where my mom was working out of state, and so she was gone Monday through Friday, and my dad was working nights. And so I would wake up, I'd go to school, do all that, come home, and then I wouldn't see an adult because my dad was working. I wouldn't see an adult Monday through Friday. And I was home alone. No, I didn't have any siblings. And so here I was, suffering with like some pretty severe mental health issues and contemplating killing myself daily, and didn't have a parent or anyone else in the house. And so that was a challenge, man, because I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't know how to verbalize it. I didn't really know what I was feeling. I didn't know if it was what everyone was feeling. I didn't know if I was different. When I would try to talk to my parents, a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, up until I finally got help, they just told me like, hey, this is just part of growing up. This is going through puberty. This is your body changing. And I remember sitting there listening to that, like, so everybody's just like suicidal all the time. Like everybody wants to kill, like life sucks. Like if that's what life is, life sucks. Like we went wrong. So like we took a left when we should have taken a right, Like, it's just this 1 + 1 is not equaling 2 in this equation. And it was a weird time, man. So yeah, my home life, my parents didn't get along well. They really didn't have a relationship at all. And my dad and myself, we didn't have a relationship at all. And my dad's a great guy. I love him. He's a great man. But the reality is as a father, I can probably count on one hand the number of times my dad and myself went and did something together, like ever, my entire life. And it just was, we just didn't have that type of relationship. And so when I talk a lot about, trying to find someone to open up to and find someone that you can trust and confide in to get help, part of what took me so long to get to that point and why things got so bad, I think, was because my parents were just kind of oblivious to it all. Like, they weren't around, and I didn't have the relationship to have that conversation.
Yeah. What about your siblings though? Like, I mean, you mentioned you had older siblings that were already out of the house, but like, were you tight with them, or could you like call them and?
Yeah, no. Just, it was weird, man. My family's just not super close.
Right.
I even today, now that I'm healthy and doing the right things, I am lucky if I talk to them once a year. We don't get together. It's just, we're just not a close family.
Yeah. You know what's funny is our first conversation we ever had. Um, I mentioned to you that like I don't have a relationship with my family, and it was like I spent years, dude. I'm 38 years old. I'll be 39 this year, and I spent years feeling like this big sense of like shame and like grief and like fuck, dude. Like I don't talk to my own mom. I don't talk to my dad. I don't talk to my brother, my sister. Like I was like, dude, what's wrong with me? And I was like questioning all that. And it wasn't until you and I had our conversation that I was like, well, okay, well, I guess like it's not that it's normal. It's just that like I'm not the only one. You know what I mean? Like there's other people that have like challenging family relationships. It doesn't make me uh, weird or different. It's just it is what it is. You know what I mean? Like I don't harbor any ill will. It's just that's the way our family is, and that's it. You know.
And I'm in the
Um,
same boat, man. Like, if one of my siblings called me tomorrow and they wanted to have a conversation and asked if they could come see me, like, I totally would. I'd have, of course. But it just doesn't happen. and
right.
uh, and so yeah, it's, I talk a lot about like having my tribe, and I have a very close knit circle of people in that tribe, and those people are family to me, and I'd do anything for them. I do absolutely anything for them. And they're not blood, and that's okay. And I would tell that to anybody that, I mean, family is amazing. Family's important. Absolutely. If you got them, take care of them. But
Yeah.
there's some folks out there who also need to know, need to hear that it's okay not to have that relationship. And and it's okay to have people in your circle who, are the most important thing to you that aren't your blood. You shouldn't be embarrassed about that.
Yeah, I want you to share a little bit about your story, like your trajectory, like you, like starting at like 15 when all this stuff started. You're like, dude, what is going on with me? Like, fuck, like I want to kill myself every day. And you were going through these like high highs and low lows where you're like the life of the party one day, the next day you like want to commit suicide. I want you to share that story of like how that process worked and like kind of what got you to where you are today in terms of mental health.
For sure, man. So yeah, like, I really kind of started feeling like something wasn't right mentally, around probably 13. Um, I don't really know what it is. Like, I don't really have a great word to describe it or a great way to tell you specifically what it was, but I just knew something wasn't right. I didn't feel good. I'd wake up and just kind of feel like there was this dark cloud like looming over me. I just started feeling a lot more anger, a lot more frustration. I was sad. It just really, the reality is I was depressed. I didn't know what it was because I was young. I didn't really tell anybody. But starting at 13, I knew something was off. And we moved to Idaho. I was 14. And I absolutely fell in love with Idaho. I grew up here. I've been here for, since whenever that was, a long time, 16 years. And so starting high school, I'm 14. And just like you said, man, I wanted to make friends. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be the life of the party and just be like a fun person to be around. But the reality is there was that side of me. And then the other side was this, sad, suicidal, just constantly depressed person. Well, that was kind of 13, 14, 15. And then I really kind of started setting into these kind of mood swing behavior. And again, I didn't know what it was. I didn't even really know if I knew the difference. I just knew that one day I would wake up and I'd feel amazing. I was full of energy. I didn't eat. I didn't I didn't slow down. I would just go. I was like infinite go. And I was like operating up here all the time. And I loved it. I felt so good. Like, I don't know if there probably is, but I don't know if there's a drug on the planet that can get you as high as a manic phase for that long a time. Like, it was like days on end where I was just like, this is awesome. I didn't sleep. I was just always infinite go. And a lot of people saw that and were just like, man, like, he is like, that's awesome. Like, and that was how a lot of people kind of saw me. And if you ask people about me from that time period, that's probably what they would think. Well, again, that's the highest of highs. And then it was like a bomb would go off, and then all of a sudden I'd be at the lowest of lows. And there wasn't necessarily anything that triggered it. There wasn't anything that like would set it off. It just happened. And sometimes that duration was very short, and sometimes it was days. But then again, I'd go back to being suicidal and just hating myself. And it was so hard to really comprehend what was going on, because I had everything. I had a house, I had a family, I had a girlfriend, I had friends, I was playing sports. I had everything that I needed, but yet at the same time, I absolutely just hated myself. I felt terrible. And I couldn't escape it. I couldn't think my way out of it. I couldn't find my inner zen. I couldn't do any of those things.
Uh-huh.
And, being a young man and growing up and having friends and doing those things, you don't want to look weak. You don't want to appear vulnerable. You don't want to be seen as, well, ultimately, like, I didn't want to be labeled as depressed or weird or someone with mental health. And so I never wanted to open up to anybody, especially my friends. And so I just started isolating myself a lot. I started running away. I started just spending a lot of time by myself. And that was hard, because in that alone time, when I was in that depressed state, things would get really bad. And I started kind of doing a lot of self-injurious behavior. I started getting into the cutting and the just all kinds of stuff that ultimately is just self-sabotage.
Right.
And a lot of that, I'm sure a lot of it looking back was like a cry for help. It was like hoping that someone would notice, hoping that someone would see and give me attention and ask what was wrong, or like ask why there were like cuts on my, like trying to subtly show people like I need help. And then the other part of it was just, it felt like it was like a release for me. This sounds really weird. And if there's people out there struggling with the same thing, the reason I'm saying this is so you know that you're not alone in this feeling, because I've heard other people say it before, and it sounds really weird, but that feeling that you get when you're very depressed and you're, hurting yourself, it actually is almost like a euphoric feeling. Like, it feels good. And that was a really hard thing for my young mind to figure out. Like, it didn't make sense. I just knew that it was like this release of like endorphins of just like, that feels better, and that kind of would calm me down. But that just goes to show you like the type of mental space I was in at the time. Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I tried to get help, and my parents didn't really want to hear it for a while until, I think it was either junior or senior year of high school. I can't really remember. But one of those times, I can't even remember the incident, but something happened at my house. And I remember my mom looking at me just with like big eyes and just being like, we need to get you help. And I was like, yeah, you think? I've been asking you
telling
for
you.
all this time.
Right.
And so the next day I went and saw a psychiatrist. And so that was the first time I'd ever received any type of mental health help. And so I'd been struggling with that for probably 4 years at the time, and hadn't really ever opened up. And so I didn't know, I just didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I should be doing. And so I just opened up to the psychiatrist and I told him what was going on. I said, hey, look, I'm suicidal. This is my story. So they were like, okay, your 5 minutes is up. Here's your prescription for depression meds. And you're going to go see this counselor over here and be on your way. And I was like, sick. Okay, cool. Well, I went from counselor to counselor to counselor to counselor. And one of, it's funny in hindsight, but if I remember right, it was either the first or second counselor I went to literally just fell asleep while I was talking to him. Just fell asleep. And I remember looking at him and being like, I am on the verge of killing myself right now. And I'm telling you this, and you fell asleep. I'm out. And I just left. I just left and walked out. I was skipping school. I was skipping school to go get counseling on almost a daily basis, trying to find someone to talk to get help. Well, meanwhile, while I'm going through this, I start taking depression meds. And I don't remember what I started with, but I remember they were like, you're still young, you're still growing. We'll start you out on kind of a mild dose, see how you react, and then we'll just ramp it up. Well, I wasn't responding very well. And so they just kept ramping it up until finally I was taking the maximum dose of, I can't remember, but the maximum dose of one of the big ones, and it wasn't working. In fact, it was making a lot of my symptoms worse. And I kept trying to explain to them, look, I know you're telling me this is supposed to help, but the reality is things are getting worse. I am teetering on the edge. This is not working. And so it just became a game of I felt like it was a game of reaching into a packet of M&Ms and just hoping you found a green one. It was okay, well, try this one. Well, try this one. And the hard thing was they tell you hey, you need 6 to 8 weeks for this to take effect. So meanwhile, here, every time I would switch, there was 6 to 8 weeks of me coming off of one and getting on another, all of which weren't the right fit. And it was tough, man. It was so tough for me. When I talk about being in a dark place, it was literally everything I could do not to drive into oncoming traffic, to and from those appointments. It was just a constant fight not to be self-injurious. And so that was I can't remember if it was, like I said, I can't remember if it was junior or senior year, but I ended up graduating high school early. And part of the reason I graduated early was just because I couldn't deal with it. I just couldn't deal with all the stress of school and people and all the stuff going on and trying to figure out my own mind. And I just kind of gave up. I did what I needed to do to be done and move on. And so I finished school early. And then at 19, again, still experimenting with different depression meds and doctors and counselors. Finally, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, her dad's a doctor. He'd kind of seen my, I don't know what you call it, my life spiral, if you will, and all the negative behavior and all the crazy things I'd done. And the reality was too, is it wasn't just me that I was affecting, and that's another big part of this that I've had to deal with and accept over time, especially as I've grown up and looked back at it, is I wasn't in all of that. I wasn't just hurting me. I wasn't just affecting me. I was hurting all the people that were close to me, because I just wasn't a good person. I was so caught up up here that I wasn't thinking about others. I hurt a lot of people, man. Not just emotionally, but physically. Like for a long time, my only response to things I didn't like was just this rage. And a lot of times that rage manifests itself in violence. And it's something I'm embarrassed about. It's something that I've had to learn and deal with and cope with over time. But that was just part of it. I just didn't have the coping skills that when I was frustrated and mad, I didn't have anything else to lash out or do besides just hurting people.
Right.
So going back, 19, my girlfriend's dad sees all this and he's like, hey, you need to go see a bipolar doctor. And I'm just like, huh? Like, of what? And he was the first person that ever even mentioned, like, it might not be depression. And he's a family doctor. And so he sees, mental health cases all the time that he refers out to specialists. And he just was like, I think you need to go see a bipolar doctor. And Idaho has one of the leading like bipolar specialists. He's like, nationally recognized as being one of the like kind of front of the, top tier doctors. So at the time, I wasn't in a good place. And so he made an appointment for me. It was kind of like an emergency appointment, which gives you an idea of where I was at. And so we had this conversation, me and him had this conversation at probably midnight. And I was in that office as they opened the next morning. Because he told him, like, you have to get this guy in immediately. So I go in and just made a complete fool of myself, usually when you go into these places, a lot of times they make you fill out a questionnaire. And they're just trying to make sure that like you don't need immediate help or like immediate attention. And so they have you like a scale of 1 through 10 with like a frowny face and a happy face, and you like circle the feeling you have. And it's like, are you feeling like hurting yourself? And I'm like, 10, yes. Are you feeling like hurting others? I'm like, 10, yes. And she's just like looking at me as I'm like circling all these 10s, just like, and I'm just like staring, I'm giving her like this like angry eye. And, and I, if I remember right, I actually said something to her that was like kind of threatening or whatever. And so and that's what, like I said, when I talk about being embarrassed of the way I acted, I truly am. Like I look back on it and I'm so glad that I've grown from what I experienced, because, they were there to help. Like they were there to help me. And I was telling them I was going to hurt them. And I remember they took me back to the doctor. They had to bring more nurses in because they didn't want to be alone with me. And then we all went in to sit with the doctor. And he, just cut and dry, talked to me for, 20 minutes and was like, Austin, you have type 2 bipolar disorder. And I was like, okay, what's that mean? And he just laid it all out for me. He's like, you experience these highs and then you experience these lows, and there's not really much in between. And I was like, yeah, you're right. That is how I feel. Like, you nailed it. And he listened to me. He understood my concerns. He understood what I was saying. He, prescribed me the right meds. And then, I touched on this on our last podcast, but the biggest thing he did for me was he told me that there was a chance that I wasn't going to be suffering with this for the rest of my life. Because every doctor that I'd seen before basically told me, like, look, Austin, you're depressed, you have depression, and you're going to be on depression meds for the rest of your life. And if you go off, you're probably going to have this like huge breakdown and probably, commit suicide. Like, don't ever go off these meds. And I'm just like, I'm like a 17, 18-year-old kid, just like, holy crap. Like, I'm like terrified. I'm like, this is the rest of my life. And the reality is as they're saying this to me, that like, this is the rest of your life, I'm looking at that like, all I think about is hurting myself, hurting other people, or killing myself. And you're sitting here telling me this is what I have to look forward to the rest of my life. I was like, why would I want to keep doing this?
Right.
You know, it was, I just felt like there was at that time, I just felt like there was nothing to live for because there was no hope. It's like, why would I want to just keep suffering through this and experimenting with these drugs and doing all this just to live a shitty life that I didn't like in the first place? You know, it didn't make sense. It's like, what's the point? And then when I went and saw Dr. Hoops, and he was like, hey, look, here's the reality. This is something not a lot of people have, but it's not the end of the world. Like, we can balance you out. And once you get balanced out and you like learn some coping skills, do some counseling, kind of work through some of these things, get your life back on track. He's like, there's a chance that as you grow up and your brain matures and your body develops around, age 25, there's a chance we might be able to back you down off some of these meds. And he's like, who knows? There's a chance that your brain may level itself out and you may kind of grow out of this. And I remember just sitting there like shocked. Like it was probably the best news that had, and I'm not making this up, it was probably the best news that had ever been given to me in my life.
Yeah.
Because it was the first time that I ever really looked at my life like there was hope. It was the first time that I was like, man, I have an opportunity to live a normal life. I have the opportunity to do all the big goals and things that I want to do. Like, I can do those things.
Yeah.
I don't have to keep suffering. And I remember sitting in there as he's telling me this, thinking, like, I don't know what the odds are. I don't really care about statistics and all that. Like, I'm going to be the guy. If it's 1 in a million, like, I'm the one. And I was like, I'm going to do everything right. I'm going to do everything right from here on out. I'm going to get back on track. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to get a healthy relationship. I'm going to treat people better. I'm going to do all these things. Well, I mean, I definitely stumbled along the way. I had multiple suicide attempts after that. I stood on the edge of a rooftop that was like several hundred feet high, with my toes hanging off the edge, trying to talk myself out of jumping. Like, all those things still happen, right? But the frequency and the severity of it started to tone down. And it got to a place where I could manage it. It got to a place where I could look at it and I could see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, where there used to not be any light, because I knew that every time I would be up in the manic phase, like, I was going to turn the corner. And it might be the next day, it might be the next, in 3 days. I didn't know, but I knew that, like, all the depression and the suicidal stuff and the self-injury stuff, I knew that was all coming. Now, fast forward it was horrible, man. And now, so fast forward to 19 and 20, that this guy's telling me, like, hey, we're going to fix this. It was the first time I really felt like there was a chance. And so that's really where my life kind of started turning around. And I did exactly that. I stayed on my meds from 19 to 25. I got married at 20. I've had as perfect of a marriage as you can have. We almost never fight. We have 2 beautiful boys, like literally almost a perfect relationship.
Right.
Went to college, got my undergrad, started a job in law enforcement that I absolutely loved and taught me more about myself than anything else could have. I really felt like, but here's the thing. I had to go get help, and I had to go talk to the right doctor, and I had to take lots of different therapy from lots of different counselors. Like, I had to do those things. It didn't all just fall in place for me. And and then, at age 25, with the care of the doctor, I slowly started backing it down. And then I got off meds altogether. And at about age 26, I remember I went and talked to the doctor, and I said, I should have gone and got it so I could show you, so you knew I was telling the truth about the story.
Yeah, I love it though.
It's in here somewhere. But I went and I told the doctor. I said, I want you to sign this. Oh, I want you to sign this and release me as your patient. I said, I want you to help take away the label that I've labeled myself with. Because for so long, gosh, man, it's never easy to tell this story, you know. For so long, I felt like such a failure. I felt like I was just like made wrong. And I felt like I was never really going to amount to anything. I was never going to be anything. I was never going to do the things I wanted to do because I couldn't escape my own mental health.
Right.
And I took this paper and I had this, you know, this is what I want. I want you to do this. I need you to release me from this so I can move on. And he did. And he signed it. It says, like, you know, Austin Legg on this date. I'm releasing him as my patient. I'm clearing him of all of his mental health diagnosis. And he signed it and he gave it to me. And it's probably one of the most important things I have.
I love it, dude.
Ultimately, to me, you know, it's symbolic of just that whole journey. I mean, that is a 12-year process of some of the most difficult things I could have probably ever struggled with. I'll probably have difficult struggles down the road, you know, but the reality is it's going to be hard to top. It's going to be hard to top some of that. And sure. And that was pretty symbolic for me to have that and to then feel like, okay, I am now free to go do anything I want and become anything I want. And that's where I'm at now.
And I think that's like with a lot of people, right? When we, you know, people that struggle with mental health and the people that are going to be listening to this episode, I'm confident a lot of people that are listening to it have had their own struggles with mental health. And when you get that label attached to you, you know, like with me, with PTSD, social anxiety disorder, general anxiety disorder, it's a shitty feeling to have that label attached to you. And I had this conversation with my wife yesterday. You know, we were going through some things and she was asking me why I haven't really been that present the last couple months. And I said, you got to understand, honey, like I've been fighting an internal battle that I have not shared with you at all. Like I haven't said anything to you. I haven't shared it with very many people at all, actually. I just kept it all inside because part of me doing this work that I'm doing right now, doing this 12-part podcast series, is healing for me as well. You know what I mean? It's giving me the opportunity to not only hear other people's story, but to share a little bit of mine. And when you're stuck in that with that diagnosis, it feels like you're trapped in your own prison. And a lot of times it's because of the stigma surrounding mental health. And that's kind of one of the main goals of this podcast episode series is to release the stigma, release it, dude, because like the more we talk about it, the more free we are. And getting that piece of paper had to be probably for me, it would have been the best day of my life, you know, for sure. And when you have someone, it's like when you have someone that believes in you, you know, they believe in what you're bringing to the table, you know, and it sounds to me like that doctor believed in you. I want you to share a little bit about the job that you went into in law enforcement. And the reason I want you to share it is because I think it's powerful to not just talk. I mean, we get stuck, myself included, because I'm a veteran. I talk a lot about veteran issues and, you know, PTSD, anxiety, things that relate to the veteran community. But there's also issues within the law enforcement community, within the prison systems and stuff like that. And I want you to talk about it, share a little bit about the piece that you wrote for the paper and the interview that you had. And just, go into it a little bit if you would.
Yeah. So I'll share something with you that I think I actually have only ever told one person about that too. And so I started in prisons as just a, you know, entry-level correction officer at 21. It was a job that I had wanted for a long time. I remember watching Lock Up Raw on TV as a kid and just being like, this looks awesome. I was like, this looks so cool.
Get to fuck people up for free.
I was like, fighting, drugs, gangs, like, this is awesome. Like, sign me up. How do I do, so like right when I turned 21, I got a job working in prisons. And they were like, all right, you're going to the maximum security institution. And I was like, even better. I was like, this is great, And,
coach.
Yeah, so it was awesome, man. And the reality is, people probably have a lot of inaccurate stereotypes about prisons. The reality is people aren't just running around stabbing each other all the time. Like, there's a lot of normal days where nothing happens, and it's just a bunch of criminals locked up, and they're trying to do their time. They're trying to rehabilitate. They're trying to get out. And, I'm there to do my job. I'm there to help meet their needs and help keep people safe. So the flip side of that is then there are days where all hell breaks loose. And there are days when, your friends get stabbed or other inmates get stabbed or people get seriously hurt and so on and so on. And people die. A lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, people do commit suicide in prison. There's a lot of self-injurious behavior. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of really, pretty terrible things that go on in prisons. Well, it was good for me because I'd really kind of figured out myself mentally right around that time period. And so I was now learning to control my emotions. I was learning to, take all of this pent up anger and frustration and put it somewhere that was healthy. Put it somewhere that made sense. Put it somewhere that helped other people, that helped people stay safe, that helped me stay safe. I went from being that guy that had like a hairpin trigger to a guy that like people would look at me, 3 inches from my face and tell me how they were going to kill my wife and rape her and, do all these terrible things. And I just sit there and be like, okay, like, sweet, man, come find me. I'm not that hard to find, and that was just it. And it taught me so much about myself and how to grow, a thick skin, about being mentally tough. And that's really where kind of that whole like swing into mental toughness and just developing this, newfound just grit for life. That's where it all came from. It started in prisons. And now there were things that I struggled with. For example, when I very first started, I worked in mental health. Now, mental health inside a maximum security prison is one of the most unique places probably on the planet. It's people who, I won't get into that, but there's some pretty sick people in there. Yeah. And one of the things I struggled with was hurting people, not just for fun, not just going out hurting people, but like, when they were acting out, whatever, and there was a force-related incident, and I was having to hurt somebody knowing that they weren't in the right headspace, right? Knowing that they were struggling with their own demons, knowing that, with the right meds, the right help, the right treatment, like maybe like that could have been me, is basically what I'm saying. I didn't necessarily see myself as one of them, but like, I feel like I understood what they were going through probably better than anybody. And I struggled a lot with some of the stuff I was doing in the mental health, area. And one of the few, I opened up about that one time to somebody, and I remember saying, dude, like, that's me. The only difference is I didn't get caught and I haven't killed anybody. But that is those people that we were doing this to, that is me. And I remember him just looking at me like, you're kidding, right? Like, they had no idea. Like, nobody knew who I really kind of was, under the surface of what they saw. And so I had my fair share of struggles, man. I remember, you develop such a callous to violence and to bad things happening that you can't talk about it. The last thing you want to be in a prison is appear to be weak. You have to come off as an alpha. You have to come off as someone who people can count on when, shit hits the fan. And I was that guy. For years, I was the guy that like they called by name to like, hey, Austin, we need you to come handle this. And I'd go all over the prison and go handle these situations. And then there was a time when I was getting called to go handle stuff at other prisons. I was getting phone calls to go handle stuff at prisons like all over the complex I worked at. And it was just, I happened to be good at it,
Right.
But at the same time, like I struggled with some of that stuff. And I remember, we were sitting in a guy, and I told you this last time, I can't remember if the guy died or not, but I remember a guy hung himself. And I remember we found him and his head, he looked like a blueberry, and we cut him down. And I don't remember what happened after that, which is weird, but I remember we cut him down. We got medical on the scene, everything. We got it all taken care of. And then after a suicide, you have these mandatory debriefings, and they bring like a counselor in, and you sit around and you talk about it and stuff. And that night after that happened, I remember it felt like the longest night of sleep in my life. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dude's face, and I couldn't sleep. Like I'd close my eyes and I could just picture that dude hanging, and it was terrible. I was like, gosh, dang, like get out of my head, So I go to work the next day. I go to the briefing, and the last thing I was going to do, or the debriefing, and the last thing I was going to do is like, yo, did anybody else like have a hard time with this? I didn't sleep last night. And I remember sitting there, I was sitting in that room, and the counselor was like, okay, like, how's everybody doing? Does everybody feel okay? And she's going around the room. And I remember, she pointed to the first guy, and he was like, I don't give a shit about that guy. Like, I don't care if he lives or dies. Like, who cares? It's just another inmate, Go to the next guy. Yeah, no, I don't really, I'm good. I don't care. Go to the next guy. No, I don't care. And he comes to me. And I'm like, I don't want to be the guy who's like, I'm struggling with this. Like, yeah, me. I got my hand up. Like, I am having a hard time. I couldn't do it. And so I just sat there and I was like, no, man, I'm good. Like, can we go back to work now? It's like complete just, I felt like I had to be an alpha all the time. And never once in prisons did I open up about any of it. Not one single time. I was able to open up on the street about suicide and bipolar and mental health, but I couldn't open up in prisons and tell people that I was struggling with some of the things I was doing, or not just doing, things I was seeing. And it wasn't, with what we've seen in the media recently, it wasn't like, I'm not saying we were out there just like stomping on people. Like that wasn't the case. But when I talk about like seeing violence and stuff, prison's a violent place. Like we saw a lot of violence. I saw a lot of violence happen to my really good friends. I had a guy try and stab me. I like all these things. I got punched, kicked, spit on. I got a window smashed out in my face. I got a TV thrown at my head. Like you name it. Like it all happened. Right. And you finally are just like so callous to it that you kind of just stop caring. You're just like, yeah, whatever. It's just part of working in prison. Well, after I left, I had never really opened up to anybody about it. And after I left, I got a phone call. So I left in 2015. I got a phone call in 2019, 4 years later. I'd been out of the prison for 4 years. I get a phone call from the public information officer, and he's like, hey, we know that you saw and did and dealt with a lot of stuff when you were out there. And I was kind of like, huh? How do you know that? But the reality is they just knew, like, my name was coming across on use of force reports like every single day. Like it wasn't a secret. Like they knew what I was doing and what I was, having to be a part of. And he was like, we know you've done a lot of these things. Would you be willing to talk about your experience with PTSD and struggles in prisons? And I said, well, I don't want to go as far as like saying that I have PTSD from prisons, but I will kind of tell my experience and open up about some of that stuff and hopefully help some other people. And so I took him up on it. In between the time of that phone call and the time when I went and sat down with the news, I got together with a bunch of friends that were still out there. I got together and we were at dinner. We were out at the Air Force Base, and we're kind of all sitting around this table. And I didn't want to be super direct about it. I just kind of casually was like, hey, you know, I've been out of the game for a while, and it's like, man, there's kind of still some stuff that I did or saw or whatever that I'm struggling with. Didn't you guys like, I'm just trying to like test the water a little bit, and just like gauge the reaction. There's like, any of you guys, you know, and these aren't just like regular floor staff. These are like the hard chargers, the guys that get called for the serious stuff, the riots and all that stuff, right? And they're all just like, huh? Like, no, what are you talking about? I'm like, and I start like naming specific incidents that I was there with some of those guys. And I'm like, remember this? Remember this? Remember this? And they're just like, oh yeah, no, I remember. Yeah, no, like, I'm good. Like, I'm ready to answer for everything I ever did. And I'm like, that's what I thought. I was like, and I don't say that as being judgmental. Absolutely not. Like, I'm not judging those guys at all, because I was that same guy. But it confirmed what I had expected. And what I had expected was that when you're in that state of mind, it's too hard to open up and appear vulnerable. It's too hard to open up and admit that you're struggling with something when you're in a environment that glorifies and thrives in violence.
Right.
So I go and I do the news piece, and I straight up just like, I tell them, I talked to them for like an hour, and I told them about some of the stuff that I experienced and what I struggled with. Well, I still haven't even watched I never read the piece in the newspaper, and I never watched the article, because I was like, I just can't. I was like, I don't want to watch.
I do that with my podcast sometimes, dude. I don't even listen to it. I'm like, I can't do it.
I can't do it. But the reality is, afterwards, the response was incredible.
Right.
People that were at the dinner that night text me. They called me. They were in my direct messages. I got phone calls and messages from police, from firefighters, from people in the military, you name it. I got everything. And it wasn't, I'm not talking about 10 messages, 20 minutes. My inbox was full, and it was texts, DMs, phone calls, like you name it. People saw me at the gym, and like the outpouring of support was incredible, man. It was like, and I told the very first thing I said when I talked to him is I said, I don't want to make this about me. I was like, I've been out of this for 4 years. It's like, I'm not the guy you guys should be talking to, but I will be the voice for the people who don't want to speak up. That's the message I wanted to portray. Is I wanted to be a voice for people who couldn't say anything because they either couldn't admit it, or they were, too caught up in that environment to see it. And I really think it was the first time for a lot of those people that they were able to like take a step back and be like, holy shit, I am not who I used to be, or I'm a bad man, but I can still be a bad man and admit that I'm having a hard time, and I don't want to take any of the credit for that story. I don't want to take any of the credit for what happened, but it was pretty special, man.
For sure.
It's the same thing as like speaking out about mental health for me. It was like, if I could help one person, right? Just one person, if I could help, like, it's all worth it to me, man. And from the response that I got, like, I think we accomplished that.
What about, like, if somebody, when you were back in there and you were back in the prisons, how could somebody have reached you then? How could somebody have gone to you? Like, and the reason I'm asking this is because I know I have multiple friends that are in law enforcement. My brother's a cop. I have multiple friends that are firefighters. And some of the things that they see and some of the things that they do, me, like in my own rational brain, is like, there's no way that you're totally okay with all this shit. You can't be. Like, you're a human. Like, some of the things you're seeing, like, yes, you're compartmentalizing like what you're seeing and doing, and I totally get it. I understand. But like, how do I reach you as an individual? How do I reach you to be like, dude, it's okay to talk to me, man? Like, I know that you're in the zone right now, and I understand that, but you will have to pay the piper one of these days. I promise you, you will. And so do you think there is a way when somebody's in the thick of it to like reach them and say like, it's okay to talk to me, man. I'm not judging you. And like, it's okay. You can let your guard down, put your shield down for a second, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely think there is. Part of the conversation that needs to be had, I think, is, when people want to talk about like, police, fire, prisons, whatever, people always say like, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen? What's the craziest thing you've ever done? What's the, have you ever seen anyone get killed? Have you ever seen, like, people want to hear the crazy stuff. And I get that. Like, I was the same way, before I started living it. Well, that's fine. And I think there is a place for that. But what would have been beneficial to me, and what I think would be beneficial for others, is instead of asking about like, hey, like, what's the craziest thing you've ever done to somebody, would be like, hey man, I know you've done some pretty crazy things. Like, have you ever taken a chance to like talk to anybody about any of that stuff? Like, do you ever, just want to like get into that stuff off your chest? Like, even that would have given me an outlet to open up about some of those things. And I probably wouldn't have said everything, but I struggled with, one of the biggest struggles I had in that job was, you'd leave the prisons where, you'd be coming home like covered in pepper spray and some dude's blood and maybe a little feces and so like whatever else. And you'd have like a 15-minute ride home where you're trying to like compress everything down, compartmentalize it, put it up in this tiny little box, hide it away, and then walk in the door, and suddenly I'm expected to be dad or, a husband or whatever. And people would just like expect me to, be there and be present.
Right.
Well, I had a hard time opening up to my wife. I never did really, because I knew she wouldn't understand, right? It was like, I didn't want to be judged for the things I was doing because I knew she wouldn't understand. In hindsight, had she asked like, hey, do you want to talk about it? Like, I'll just listen. I was afraid of being judged, is what a lot of it came down to. I was afraid of being judged for the things I was doing because I knew people wouldn't understand. But yet, having had the chance to voice some of those things would have really helped me. Right. And so, yeah, I think it goes back to just asking the right questions and being a listener without trying to solve the problem, without trying to, fix the situation. It's like, just listen.
Yeah. There's a couple people like, and I think the other thing for me is like to listen without being judgmental, because I think part of me is I can see through certain things, you know what I mean? Especially because I've dealt with a lot of it. And like, there's friends that I have that I know some of the things that they've seen, and then I'll talk to them like, you okay with that, man? Like, you went to your critical incident stress debriefing. Like, how was that? Oh, fuck, I don't need that pussy shit. And it's like, okay, but you're coming home and drinking a 12-pack to 18 beers like every time you come home. So like, what that tells me is that like you're hiding something. Like, I mean, sure, you might like to have a couple beers, like whatever, like that's fine. But like to drink in excess like that, to where like every time you're drinking, you're getting hammered. It's like there's something you're not wanting to deal with. And so like, I need to learn to just listen and not even just put the judgment to the side. You know what I mean? Like whatever, even though I may think a certain way or assume a certain thing based on their behavior, just give them the opportunity to share if they feel open to it, because I think it could save lives, because I think there's people that are in positions like you where it's like you were dealing with all these things and you weren't sharing it. Thankfully you were able to share it eventually, because I think you'll implode. Like if you don't, I mean, I think it catches up with you for sure.
Yeah. And going back, like all of the mental health struggles that I'd had for so long, really, I feel like prepared me for a lot of it. Like it prepared me because that was hard, right? That was a hard time in my life. And so it prepared me to be able to do a lot of those things and see those things and be a part of it and live it and not ultimately implode. And I feel like I'm lucky because I came out of that and I look back at it as one of the best times in my life because of how much it taught me and how much I grew. When a lot of people come out of prisons, man, they're jaded, they're angry, they come out just hating inmates and and they're just like, it's almost like they came out worse than they went in.
Yep.
I look back at it, I'm like, I tell people all the time, I was like, man, if you're ever like bored or something, like go work in a prison. Like, it's awesome. I loved it.
I know a guy that worked in one, and he was like he's like a sociopath though. You know what I mean? You would talk to the guy and you could just tell that something wasn't right. So I think you have like the two spectrums. You have one where it's like you that takes like some good out of it, and then the other ones are like, they're perfect for that job because they completely compartmentalize and they're sociopaths and like they have no feeling, no conscience, and it doesn't matter to them, you know? And I'm just, it's super scary, dude. But like, that's why there's people that I know that are police officers, and same boat, man. Like, it's like they probably should not be police officers, and not probably shouldn't be. They shouldn't be. And with that conversation that's going on in the country, you know, now I think that's part of it. It's like we talk about mental health, and it's like, well, what are we doing to vet like some of these police officers? What are we doing to vet some of these prison guards? And like, you see these people have multiple infractions for, use of force, or multiple infractions for, I know anybody can complain about a police officer, and you can have multiple complaints, and most of them probably are unfounded, but there has to be something set in place where it's like there has to be more accountability and more like, you can't just be a power tripping dude with a gun that like gets empowered with the ability to harm people, and there's no repercussions for it. I've never been a fan of bullies, and unfortunately what we're seeing, I mean, what we saw in the news with this gentleman that murdered George Floyd, it's a fucking bully, dude. It's a pussy. Like I have no love for it at all. And I'm bringing it up because it's a current topic. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with it too much, but I do want to voice my support for the people that are protesting to encourage change, that are trying to promote change. I'm not a fan of looting and tearing up streets and businesses. It's not my intention. I still support law enforcement, but there needs to be some change in this country, and I hope through some of the things that are going on in our country that we'll see some of those changes sooner than later. I want to ask you about social media. I mean, in today's day and age, I mean, everything, I would have never met you if it wasn't through social media. My podcast wouldn't be what it is today without social media. It almost feels like it's a necessary evil for kind of, if you want to have a platform, if you want to be heard, if you want to be out, you almost have to be on social media. There's days like today was one of them where I contemplated just fucking shutting it all down. Like, I want to isolate. I want to get away. I just want to be done. And, but I know I can't do that because it goes against everything I'm about, like I'm trying to make a positive difference in the world, and through social media, I'm going to use that platform to do just that. But I can find ways to put things in place to kind of protect myself mentally. And this is one of them that I'm doing to protect myself. We talked about it before. So yeah, dude, I was going to go buy one, buy a flip phone. For people that don't see the video, I just showed Austin my new old school 2006, I think, like one of those push-up phones or whatever, Samsung. Yeah, I'm done with the iPhone, man. That was my wife's phone, or her dad's phone. And I told her I wanted to buy a flip phone, and she was like, "You're crazy. Like, you have your podcast, you have Instagram." I was like, "I have a computer though. I can do all that stuff through my computer." And with my computer, it's like it actually takes more physical effort to get my computer out, sit down, and actually do the things that I want to do. But with my phone, it's just too accessible for me, and I find myself wasting time. Like, I'm going through looking at all these things on social media. I did it today where I went through and unfollowed a bunch of accounts that don't bring me any joy. Where it's like, dude, I'm looking at your accounts for what? Like, for what? Why am I following you? Like, it doesn't add any value to me. Like, I look at this and I'm bummed out. I'm depressed. I'm like, this isn't cool at all. So I want to ask you, with social media, what are your thoughts on social media? Do you think it's a detriment to mental health, or do you think it's a positive for mental health?
Ultimately, social media can be whatever you want it to be. It can be a tool for good. It can be a tool for bad. And it's up to you. It's in your hands, And so when I hear that you unfollow people that aren't bringing you joy, man, I want high five, dude. I think that's fantastic. I told you last time, and I'll tell you again, I have 3 very simple rules for social media. And I made these rules a long time ago, and they still hold true, and they have kept me above a lot of the, nonsense. Yep. And that's 1, I don't post anything negative. I have bad days. I have, I have frustrations. I have all those things, just like everybody else. But I make it a point not to air my dirty laundry on social media, because negativity breeds negativity. And the more negativity I spew out into the world, and the more negativity I push on other people, the more I'm going to get back. So no negativity. You can go through everything on mine. You're not going to find it. Second, I cut out toxic people. Man, I got no problem blocking people. I got no problem deleting people. I just don't care, because I have so many other good things going on. Why waste a second of my day on somebody who I don't know, don't care about, have no relation to, who thinks I'm a jerk for killing bears? I don't care. I have my own life. And when people bring that toxicity around me, gone, done. I don't need to deal with it. And then third, part of why I have such a great relationship with my wife is because I'm super respectful to her. And a lot of that comes back to social media. When my page started kind of growing and getting bigger, it attracted a lot more attention from women. And one of the things I've made it a point is, if somebody, I think it's totally appropriate to be friends with girls. And I talk to girls all the time. I have a ton of girlfriends that are super awesome, and they hunt and they do all these cool things. But as soon as that conversation turns into something it shouldn't, gone, done, blocked, delete, whatever. Hey, I'm actually, this is not, I'm sorry if you got that vibe, not my intent, whatever. And it's easy. It's just easy. I have that groundwork and the hard rules in place. And as soon as that pops up, it's easy for me to just be like, yeah, nope, see ya. And because I do those things, I've done them for years. They're just a part of what I do, my platform. Man, social media is cool. It's a positive thing for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think the reason I wanted to ask that question on this podcast series was because I see a lot of people, especially the people that I'm having on this series, have big followings. You know what I mean? And it takes a lot of time to get there. You know what I mean? There's some people that pay for followers and pay for likes and pay for what. I've never done that. I'm not going to do that. I have no intention to do that. And I think most of the people that I've had on the podcast aren't doing that either. And if they are, that's their prerogative. But at any rate, it takes time to build a following. It takes time to build, a social media platform, if you will, where you become an influencer. And for me, I think that was the biggest problem I had with social media in terms of mental health, was that I wasn't being present enough. I was using social media as as a checkout tool, where it's I got some time to kill. I'll just go flip through Instagram or whatever and do more stuff. Or I'd be in a moment with my kids. It's let me get a picture of that real quick. And it's so I can post it to the gram later. And it's dude, I don't know. So I need to find better ways of managing my time, and better ways of being more disciplined with my time, being this is my time for my family and my kids. This is time for social media. And if I'm going to use things for social media, as far as pictures and stuff like that, I want to have that intention already before I even go, or before I go do things hey, today I'm gonna go capture some content or whatever. And that, yeah. So,
and that's honestly, I think that's something that everybody struggles with. I'm terrible at it. Just tonight, for example, so last night I was putting my kids to bed, and a lot of times when my boys, I have 2 boys, and they sleep in a queen bed, I'll lay with them until they fall asleep.
Right.
Well, a lot of times I'll just turn over and look at my phone while they're falling asleep. And so I'm there, and whatever. Well, last night, my 4-year-old was like, hey, Dad, will you stop looking at your phone for a minute? And I was just like, oh,
Good gut
terrible.
shot,
It
dude.
made me feel terrible, man. I was like,
Yeah.
gosh, the last thing that dude's gonna go to bed with tonight is a picture of me with my back turned towards him, looking at my phone.
Right.
And so tonight, we were supposed to start this podcast on the hour, and I texted you and I was like, hey, I'm gonna be a little late.
Yeah.
It's because what I did is I left my phone downstairs, and then I went upstairs to put him to bed without it.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about that was, tonight with those guys trying to fall asleep, instead of me looking at my phone, I got to spend a little more time with them. And, I fell asleep holding my 2-year-old's hand, or he fell asleep holding my hand. And so now it's like they fell asleep knowing like dad was there, he was present. My 2-year-old fell asleep holding my hand instead of just looking at the back of my head. And so, yeah, man, like I'm in the same boat. That's a struggle for everybody, I think.
For sure. Yeah, so I'm just trying to get rid of those distractions to the best of my ability where I can still send out a positive message, but I don't want to be in that boat anymore, where it's like I look at family pictures or whatever, my wife's taking a picture with the kids and there I am in the background on my phone. It's like, damn it, dude, I need to get off that shit. Yeah, totally. I want to ask you 2 questions before we sign off, man. And one of them is when you were in the darkest place that you've ever been, like in your life, what ways did you get out of it? Like, how did you get out of those places? And what kept you from going over the edge? What kept you from saying, you know what? I'm fucking killing myself. This is it. What kept you from doing that, and how did you get out of it?
That's a good question, man. I think the reality is as much as I hated myself and as much as I hated my life and as bad as I felt and all those things, I think the reality is I was scared. I look back at a lot of the ways I acted and my behavior, and I think it was equally as much me being in pain as it was a cry for help. And a cry for help with the intention that somebody would come, basically try and rescue me. And it's silly to say, but when you're in it, that's really what it is. You're just like begging for someone to come help and wanting someone to notice you. Right. And, we talked about this last time, so I apologize. I know you've heard me say these things.
Dude, your story is incredible, man. So like I enjoy hearing it, man. Please.
One of the things that, like, when things were really bad, I was living at my friend's house, and I remember there was a day where I just had enough, and I was like, I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore, and I'm over it. And I remember thinking, I was in their basement, and I was like, I'm gonna hang myself. Like, I'm done. And I knew how to tie a noose. I've done it before. I had everything I needed. I found a big beam, outside, and I was like, this is it. I'm gonna do this. Well, what stopped me was I took a pause, and I was like, I remember thinking, I want to ruin my life. I want to throw my life away. I want to end my life. I don't want to ruin someone else's. And the family I was living with at the time, the only people that were home were the 2 twin brothers, the younger brothers. And at the time, they were probably like 14 years old. And they looked up to me, right? They looked up to me like a brother. I've been living with them for a while, and I was part of the family. But they just didn't really know what was going on, and I didn't want them to find me hanging from the rafters. And I remember having that thought in my head of, I want to ruin my life, not theirs. And so I didn't hang myself. I went in the bedroom, I took a bunch of pills, and I tried to OD. Well, I remember waking up in the hospital, And I had all kinds of thoughts going through my head, right? I had the holy crap, I can't believe I'm still alive thoughts. The like, I was so groggy that it was kind of just like, where am I? What's going on? You know, like it took me so long to like regain full consciousness, because I was just like, you know, I was like doing 2-hand shovels of stuff. And that split second of pause to think about somebody else in that moment not only changed my, you know, saved my life, but really affected theirs. And then they don't know that, you know.
Right.
But I think ultimately I was scared. It was like deep down, I wanted a normal life. There were things I wanted to do. You know, I was suicidal, but I don't know if I ever really like wanted to die. If I wanted to die, why didn't I just put a pistol in my mouth? You know, like, why didn't I make it permanent? Why didn't I cross the line? And I think ultimately, like, as sick as I was, I knew that there were things I wanted to become. And going full circle, when it comes back to Dr. Hoops telling me I had a chance, telling me there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and that there was a potential that I could be that, you know, 1 in a million statistic. That's why I grabbed onto that so hard, I think, was because like I didn't kill myself because I wanted that opportunity.
Right.
And when I hear, you know, I had a friend of mine killed himself a couple years ago. And I mean, it leaves you with so many questions. You know, it leaves you with so many questions. And I don't condone suicide. It's not, you know, it's not something I'm supportive of. It's absolutely horrible and it's heartbreaking. But as someone who spent so much time there, it's almost like I get it, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a really weird thing to say, but like, I understand what those people are going through. And it's so difficult, man. Like anybody who's ever been suicidal, and maybe it's not just once, maybe it was twice or 3 times, or maybe it's your whole life like it was mine. Like, it's so difficult. It's so challenging because it takes over. It just takes over your whole life. It takes over everything.
Right.
It's heartbreaking, man. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And man, I just feel so fortunate that now I get the opportunity to be the voice of support for someone else. It's like there's so many times I look at where I'm at and I look at what I'm doing. I look at the things I'm accomplishing. I look at my kids. I look at my wife. I look at my job. I look at all these things I have going on. And I realize that all of this was, I mean, a split second, a matter of inches, a matter of one bad decision away from all being gone, all of it.
Yeah.
And when I look at other people who are struggling with the same thing, it's like, man, you have no idea what you could accomplish. Because the reality is like I'm nobody special, right? I'm just like the most average. I'm an average athlete. I'm average at school. I'm an average friend. I'm pretty much average at everything I do. But one thing I can do is be a voice for people who can't, or don't want to, or don't have the courage to. Because there's probably somebody out there who's awesome at being a friend, or awesome at school, or awesome at their career, who's teetering on that edge. That if we can bring them back and show them that, hey man, like there is a chance, there is a little bit of light at the edge of that. And if you can get there, there's a little more and a little more. And you just got to keep pushing, because ultimately, like, things will get better. Like, they will get better eventually. Man, when I was going through that for 3 years, if you would have told me like, hey, it's going to get better, I would have told you you're a liar. I would have told you there's no way, there's not a chance. And now here I am today. Like, just doing the coolest, craziest stuff, like doing all the greatest things in life I could have ever imagined.
Right.
And I'm so fortunate. And so I don't take any of this for granted, man. I don't take any of this for granted. And every chance I get to help people, I'm going to. Because like I said, man, there's so many people out there who need help.
If you could give a message, like if there was a message that you could, what's that?
That was a rant, dude.
Nah, dude, I love it, dude. If there's a message though, like say there's someone that is teetering, that's like they're on the edge and they want to end it, man. They're just done. They just can't do life anymore. And there's one thing you could say to them, like you have an opportunity to like say something to them to like before they make that final decision, that permanent decision for a temporary problem. What would that message be?
The reality is there are people out there who care about you, and there's hope. Like, and that would have helped me so much knowing. You know, when I talked about the guy who I lost today, he was one of those people for me. He was one of those people who was always checking in on me, who I know loved me and he cared about me. And if you really thought about it, every single one of us can identify somebody, you know, a friend, a grandma, a parent, a sibling, a niece, a nephew. Like there is someone out there who cares about you. And not only that, like it will get better. I was so caught up in this mindset of like, you know, this selfish mindset of like, why does nobody care about me? Like I'm begging for attention. I'm begging for help. Like, why does nobody care about me? Why is nobody stopping their lives to check in on me and to talk me off the edge? Well, the reality is what I didn't know is like people have their own lives. People have their own concerns. People have their own things going on. But just because they're busy, it doesn't mean that if I was the one who picked up the phone and said, hey, you know, I'm thinking about killing myself right now and I need help. Man, it didn't matter when, it didn't matter what time, it didn't matter what it was. I could have had a dozen people at my house at any given moment.
Right.
And I know that now. And I didn't know that back then. And that's the message for these like people out there is like, just pick up the phone, ask for help, send a text, send a message, like say something, because people aren't going to come to you. They just aren't. And it's not because they don't care about you. It's not because they don't love you. It's because they just don't know a lot of times. Like nobody knew what I was struggling with. Nobody knew. But I know if I would have asked, I would have got it. Ask for help.
I'm so glad you said that, man.
That's it.
Yeah.
You have to ask.
I think we all get stuck. I know with the passing of Rory, I had that like survivor's guilt, you know, of like, fuck, dude, like he messaged me and then I responded and it was a normal message. I didn't find anything odd about that message, but you know, you're asking those questions like, fuck, should I have hit him up more? Like, should I have checked? Should I have seen like something or a sign or like picked up on something? And sometimes there is no answers. Like there's no answer to it. And it's like, and we need to remove ourselves from having that guilt of like, I should have reached out more, because at the end of the day, it's a two-way street. And it's like, if someone's hurting, there's no way of me knowing that unless they let me know that, unless they're willing to. Because there'll be times that I've reached out to people and I'll get the knee-jerk response. Like, how you doing? Oh, I'm great. Everything's fine. But inside, they're completely crumbling, but they're not going to share that with me. So if they don't share, like I can't help somebody that doesn't let me know they need help, you know? So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, there's hope, man. There's hope.
What are some things that you did to find that light, to find like your way out of the dark places?
You know, I had to find healthy outlets. I had to find ways to train my body, train my mind, and do things that made me feel good that weren't hurting myself. I fell in love with the outdoors. I fell in love with hunting. I fell in love with just being around people who helped me feel good about myself, like finding real friends, and doing things that were uplifting and positive. Man, that made such a big difference. Just surrounding myself with positive, good people. And then when I needed to escape, when I needed to get away, when I needed alone time, I knew what to do. I knew to go, go for a hike, go camping, go backpacking, go hunting, go fishing, go do something, to kind of get away and decompress. And finding those healthy avenues, finding a way to kind of escape that was healthy, it made a huge difference for me, man. A huge difference. And it was no longer I was escaping to, go be suicidal and go isolate and things like that. Now it's I escape really to like refocus and kind of recenter and, prioritize things. A lot of times when I go out and I, go for a hike or do these things, I ask myself like, okay, Austin, like what's stressing you out right now? And I'll like list it out in my head. What's stressing me out? Okay, here's my top 10 stressors. All right, Austin, what can I control? What of these 10 stressors are in my control that I can change right now? Okay, these 2 things. I'm stressed out that I got in a fight with my boss. Okay, all right, I'm going to call him after this. All right, there's 1, check. What's number 2? Oh, I'm stressed out because I yelled at my kid earlier. Oh, okay, I'll fix that when I go home. All right, now these other 8 things I can't fix. They're out of my control, right? Can I let them go? Yeah, I can probably let go of these 5. And what about these last 3, right? So I do all of these things. I'll go through, I'll check these things off. I'll get done. I'll call my boss. Hey, let's talk this out. I'll go home. I'll buy my kid an ice cream. I do those things. But a lot of it, when I get away, like I said, man, it's for a purpose. It's not just to go out and like think about how bad my life sucks, but it's recentering and figuring out like, how do I fix what's stressing me out? And that's been huge. It's been huge.
I think when we get outside of our own heads, it's like so healing. I mean, some of the best inner dialogues I've ever had with myself have been while I've been hiking. And I feel like I find a lot of solutions to my problems when I'm hiking because I'm having this inner dialogue, like you said, and like, okay, what can I fix? What can't I fix? And like the things that I can fix, what can I do to fix them? And like you're going through this whole thing. And like the first time that I really realized that I was doing that, I guess I did it a lot in my life. And I did it through sports or I did it through other outlets to kind of get out of my own head. But when I got off all of my mental medication, like the benzodiazepines and all the pain pills and all the other stuff, when I quit all of it, I was like in this like torture chamber, dude, like in my own head, dude, like just fucking miserable, dude. And I'm surprised, I guess is the word, that I didn't kill myself because that was like the worst time in my life, like going through it. And one of my buddies came to me and said, hey man, I think what would help you like get through this, because you're just staying in your own head, you're staying in your house, you're staying in, like I would go in my truck and just like sleep in my truck down by the beach. I was doing anything to like make it go away so I can just get through it because like the withdrawals were so intense. And he's like, I think you should go hike. And so what I did was I hiked to the top of this mountain that was like super steep, and I hiked all the way up to the top, and then I walked down and I was like, okay, I'm pretty spent. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to put these shoes, I had hiking shoes. I was like, I'm going to put these hiking shoes in my truck. I'm going to put on some walking shoes. And I walked 17 miles to Pasadena from, I was in a city called Azusa. So I walked all the way to Pasadena. And by the time I was done, like my feet were completely blistered because I didn't have the right socks on. They probably weren't the right shoes to wear, like whatever. My back was all locked up, but I wasn't thinking about the withdrawals. I was completely done like thinking about the withdrawals. I was just thinking about motoring to the location that I was going to. So I think there's so much power in like doing something that kind of crushes your body physically to help you mentally. So yeah, I don't know, just my piece.
Hey, well, this weekend, man, I'm doing the David Goggins 4. Did you see this on social media?
Yeah, I saw that. Was it 4 miles every
4 miles every 48 hours for 48 hours. So I'm going to start.
Oh, wait, 4 miles every 48 hours?
Nope. Run 4 miles.
Yeah.
Every 4 hours.
Okay.
And you do that for 48 hours straight.
Whew.
So that means waking up in the middle of the night, going and doing 4, come home, sleep for 2.5, 3 hours, waking up again in the middle of the night, go out, run 4. I'm gonna do that for 48 hours.
Wow, dude. I love it. Yeah, I saw you tagged me in it and I was like, dude. I think
You're right. Like, you're 100% right, man. I spent so much of my life struggling to do anything because of how miserable I was and how sick I was, that now I feel like I'm unstoppable. My wife's always like, you need to quit thinking you're invincible. And I'm like, no, I don't. I am invincible. I can do anything I want. It's like, it drives her insane. She absolutely hates that about me. But like, the reality is I know anything I decide to do, I can do. And that's taken years and years of just mental grinding of difficult things. And I'm still not there. Like I have weaknesses and everything else, obviously. But I've also done a lot of really cool, really hard things. And one of the goals I was trying to do this year was a 100-mile race. And the whole coronavirus thing totally threw that for a loop. And I struggled for, probably a couple weeks of being disappointed in myself for failing a goal that I'd set. And I remember I was sitting there, I was frustrated, and I was like, man, I hate not reaching my goals. I hate failing. And I was just like, why am I waiting for an organized race to have something to train for, to have something I can accomplish, for someone to pat me on the back and say, good job for doing this race? I was like, why don't I just go do my own race and make up my own thing and have my friends do it with me? And then we can all pat each other on the back and be like, that was awesome. We grew from that. We learned something about ourselves. We pushed through struggles. And so I got a group of like my 10 closest buddies. We're all in a group chat and we're like hyping each other up. We're, getting each other fired up and all ready to go do this. And we're going to go hammer it out for 48 hours this weekend. And it's like,
I love it.
Why, why wait? Let's go.
Yeah, it's something that needs to be said about the mindset piece, because there's certain things as I've gotten older, I'm 38, like I said, going to be 39, and, the 6 back surgeries and whatnot. I don't ever allow like my back surgeries, or maybe sometimes I do, like allow my back surgeries to kind of hold me back from doing certain things. But one of the things that like I know about my body is like, I'm willing to push myself to the limit. But I don't want to be an idiot about it. You know what I mean? Like I want to live a little bit longer where I'm not like in excruciating pain. So like there's certain things I just won't do because I'm like, that doesn't really make much sense to me. But I think with mindset, the more that I spend training my mind, and you actually taught me this without even knowing it. The last podcast we did in Idaho, you said that you had gotten so good at quitting. Like everything you ever did, you quit. You were like, I just quit everything. And you were like, so I just decided one day that I'm done quitting. I'm just done. I'm just not going to quit anymore. And it became like this thing that you train your mind like not to quit. And I found like when I was recovering from like my back surgery or whatever, and I was like, I'm not taking any pain pills. And it was like excruciating because it's like a major 12-hour operation and I'm in a lot of pain, and like the nights were the worst because I'm in the dark and like everyone's asleep and I'm alone in my own pain and shit. And I was like, I could have just taken a pill. It was right next to me in my nightstand. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And the more nights that I went through it, the more like resolve I had, the more resiliency I had, the sharper I was. And I think it goes to show, like, for the things you've done, like being in the Guinness Book of World Records, it's like, what the fuck, dude? It's crazy, dude. Go from being this guy that like is like trying not to commit suicide, quitting everything that he starts, and now being in the Guinness Book of World Records. It's like, it's possible, dude. It's possible.
It is possible.
So
I mean, hey man, quitting is as much a habit as anything else.
Totally.
It's a habit. And when you get good at it, you get really good at it.
Yeah.
And it's just too easy.
Yep.
And that was absolutely a huge part of my life, and a huge part of the failures I had was just that it was too easy to be a quitter. And now it's the opposite. It's succeeding is a habit, meeting goals is a habit, refusing to fail is a habit. And now that is becoming not necessarily easy because I work for it, but like I'm addicted to the feeling of it. I'm addicted to the grind. I'm addicted of the, like, I set another goal, I crushed it. What's the next hard thing I can do? And that's been a total paradigm shift, man.
No, and I think it's awesome too. Like you talked about going on your bear hunt and like you were carrying the bear bait in. And I posted something the other day about like crushing my inner bitch. And yeah, I never want to come across as this guy that's like, oh, let me be preachy and like, mindset's everything, don't be a pussy. But at the end of the day, like a lot of the advice I give or all the stories I share, it's me talking to myself. It's me giving me it's like the advice I need to hear the most. And so every day I do a little something to like crush that inner bitch where it's like, I really don't want to bike 10 miles today. I'm not feeling it, but I'm purposely going to do it. And then if I don't do it for whatever reason, like my mother-in-law comes over to visit or something happens and I get taken off my plan, the next day I'm going to pay the man. So it's like the other day I biked 4 miles and not 10. So I was like, okay, so what that means is next day I'm doing 16 miles because I skipped those other 6. And it's always these little tiny like steps because they all add up, dude. Eventually, like there's nothing you can't do, And so I love that story because you were like, dude, I wanted to quit. I wanted to just leave it there. You're like, nope, not doing it. Not doing it.
Oh man. And the funny thing is what kept going through my head was that Guinness record, man. I was like, I've done harder things than this. And then I got so mad at myself for feeling that weakness. Like almost to the point of like, I was nauseous of just like, this isn't me. Like, I'm not a quitter. What are these thoughts? It's like, it's been so long since I've had thoughts like this. What is this? And honestly, I think I'll admit it. I think I got pretty soft during the coronavirus. Not having gyms open, not having, races and on all these things. I got soft, man. And this was one of the like first kind of hard things I'd done was pack in this, it was like 120 pounds of bear bait up like 1,000-mile, 1,000-foot elevation over like 3 miles to my bait. And I was just like huffing and puffing and complaining and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I just wanted to take my backpack off, set it down. And I was like, I'll come get it later. And dude, I wish you could have heard the inner dialogue on that mountain. It was like, what is this? Who are you? You've done worse things than this. Like, this is not you. This is not you. It's like, Austin, get this pack back on your back. Get your ass up there, And it was like, It was one of those moments of like, this isn't me. Like, I can do this. I've done way harder things than this. And yeah, man, that's what it is. I still struggle with those things, but the reality is I'm a lot better at it now than I was in the past.
Yeah. And I used to struggle there. Yeah, I used to struggle like trying to, people would ask me questions like, how'd you get off all your pills? How did you do this with your back surgeries? How did you hike this mountain after this back surgery? How did you do this? How did you do that? And I never really had an answer because like it was a lot of it was internal for me. A lot of it was like, it was just a grittiness. It was like, dude, I hate quitting and I hate like giving in and I'm kind of a stubborn dude. So like, I'm just going to grind until I die, like whatever. But one of the things I learned along the way from podcasting and just meeting other people was that mindset is, I used to think that, it's my mindset, I was born with this. I was born to be like the guy that I am, but it really is something you develop over time. It's something that you develop through like hardship. It's something you develop through going through things, experiencing life, pushing yourself, pushing your limits. And so that's what I tell people now. It's like, hey, listen, like, I'm not saying you need to be like me and I'm not trying to be like you, but if you want to get this certain skill set, or you want to accomplish some things these other people are accomplishing, set these little tiny goals for yourself, man, and develop that mindset. Do the hard things, man. Take cold showers. Do things that like really continually every day. Find something that sucks and just do that. Do something that sucks that you don't want to do, and you're just going to train your mindset to do anything. What's the best way, dude, for people to connect with you?
Instagram's probably the easiest. I'll respond to everybody. It's just Austin.Legg. And yeah, man, I'm here to help. I want to help. If people are struggling, please reach out. You can reach out to me. I'll be a stranger, but I'll listen. I'll get back to you. I'll listen. But yeah, use me if you need me.
So you have an incredible story, man. Like I told you at the beginning of the podcast, and I'll tell you again, dude. Like I really truly believe that like you haven't even scratched the surface of what you're going to do. Like I was talking to Brandon about I wanted to put together like a men's group, like doing like some kind of men's retreat. And there was a men's retreat that I went to, and I'm not knocking that men's retreat because I got a lot out of it. It was absolutely amazing. But there was one of the guys at the retreat, him and I connected like instantly. It was like, dude, like I see you, you see me. The killer in you is a killer in me. And like we just connected. And both of us felt like there was something missing for us. Like we felt like we were kind of like the oddballs of the group. We still felt like it was inclusive, but there was something inside of us, a savagery inside of us that felt like we get each other, but like this isn't all for us. You know, we learned a little bit. So I was telling Brandon, I was trying to articulate that into words. And I was like, dude, I want to have like an authentic group of dudes where like we can come and like air our stuff, be vulnerable, be like, and just let it all out, but also do things that develop our mindset, that make us do that, have us do hard things. And like, you know, so it's all like, it's just like a huge like benefit to everyone that shows up. Like anybody that shows up is going to get something from it. And I would love for you to be a part of like us creating something like that, because you're like I said, man, I don't think you realize like how much power you have, dude, and how powerful your story is. And like, it's amazing, dude. And I feel so honored to know you, man, and to be your friend and to be able to have you on this podcast and you to share your story with me. And I'm honored, bro. So thank you.
Well, I'm super humbled, man. If you would have told me, 10 years ago, if you would have told me I'd someday be in a position to help people, I'd have told you you're a liar. So I'm super humbled, man. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate the platform to talk to people. So
yeah, man. Well, thank you so much, brother. And I look forward to seeing you soon, dude. I'll be coming up to see you, I promise.
Sounds good, dude.
All right, brother.
Okay. Have a good night, man. I'll talk to you later.
All right, brother. Later.
Thank you for listening to My Backstory. Stay motivated and stay connected off the show. Follow at my_backstory_ to be a part of the journey to recovery and to see where your story goes. Or visit us online at hereismybackstory.com.